Before we kick it off, I just want to just give everyone a hug right now, mentally. I know we've had a tough year with the pandemic, year or two, in fact. Many of us are kind of still just feeling a lot of fear in the world because maybe a war, maybe some violence in the community, maybe some financial hardship. And this lecture, it really is designed to be a balm, a healing comfort in your life. It's designed to bring you at one with God, to bring you home to the consciousness of divine, infinite love. What we're going to talk about today is this idea that there really is only one power in life, one God, one source, one cause behind everything. If you pick up a Bible, I've read this Bible cover to cover. I love the Bible. And it's written by so many different people from so many different areas of the world with different points of view. It's written over a 1,500-year period by many different authors. And imagine how different a book you would write than the book your grandfather would write. Such different books. And yet, this book, it doesn't just contain one kind of literature. There are books that have myth in them and allegory. There are books of lamentations, or there's one book about lamentations. There's a lot of poetry in it, a book of psalms or songs. There's letters, there's biographies, there's essentially history books in this. And yet the one thing that ties all the stories and ideas in this book together is that there really is one God. That's kind of the thesis of the Bible. There's one cause, one source behind it all. And later in the Bible, it says that God is love. I think that's probably the best word there is for God. And many people have been inspired by this idea over the years that God is love, that love is behind everything. But today we're going to talk about what you call the science of love, the deep logic and universal understanding of how to bring thought and our lives in line with infinite divine love, with truly the one source of everything. Now, I was speaking to a member of the sponsoring church from Burien, Washington today, and she was telling me how she heard gunshots outside of her home recently, and how gun violence is something their church is really praying about. And they also talked about homelessness being a big issue in their community. And it reminded me of an experience I had some years ago. I was living in Boston, not too far from where I am right now. And at the time, I was commuting to work on a regular basis. And I would get off on this bus, and I would walk a few blocks back to my home. And every day I would pass by this homeless man who seemed to be very violent. And I started to think maybe I should share with him some of the ideas in the Bible that have been helpful to me, some ideas in this book that helps you understand the Bible called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures that I'll talk about today. Because reading these two books together have just brought so much healing in my life. When I was first introduced to this book in college, quickly I started to see the life in a totally different way, in a holy, spiritual way. And that new vision of life started to naturally bring out harmony in my life and in the lives of those in which my life touched. And I was doing personal care work for a woman who was chronically ill, and not too long after, she was taking dance classes and art classes, a wonderful restoration of life. My dad, who was a longtime alcoholic, I started to view him differently, and he quit drinking. I had a shoulder injury that bothered me for many, many years. I had to stop playing sports because of it when I was a kid, and I started to see my body in a different way, and that pain just vanished. It was always kind of in the background. And so I wanted to share with this man some of the ideas that had helped and healed me over the years. But boy, every time I just even started to broach the concept about the Bible or about some inspirational idea, this man would just lash out, and I actually felt a lot of fear, like he was going to hurt me because he was this big, strong guy. Well, every day when I was headed back from work, I thought, okay, well, this is the day I'm going to start sharing with him, and maybe some idea will really take root in him and help heal him. And every day, I just, in the background, I always had this fear. And I wouldn't say that much, and his reactions would often affect me a lot. And this happened for months, for months. Until one day, it just struck me that there really couldn't be two versions of this man. The first thing that the Bible says is that each and every one of us are the image and likeness of God. That's all that God makes, is something in its own nature. You know, something spiritual can't make something material. Something ugly can't make something beautiful. Something upside down can't make something that's right and orderly. And this is a big theme in the Bible, that a good tree produces good fruit. Whatever comes from something needs to be like it. Of course, we see that with humans who kind of look like their parents or act like their parents. And that analogy is used a lot in the Bible, that we are sons and daughters of God. Now, sometimes when people read the Bible, they just think, well, Jesus is the Son of God, and we see him expressing God so much in the Bible. There's this incredible outpouring of love and goodness and healing from his life, but I don't see that from my life. Maybe I'm just a sinner. Interestingly, when you really dive into this book, what you start to see is that the way that Jesus viewed people, I don't think he saw people as incomplete sinners. He said that he was the light of the world, but then he looked at people who were following in his footsteps and following his teachings, and he said that they were the light of the world. He said that he was the Son of God, but the Bible says that we're the Son of God. Jesus spoke about himself like God, and the very first chapter says that we, each and every one of us, are the image and likeness of God. And I started to recognize that that man on the street, that vision that I was seeing with my material senses, was not the real man. That was not his real identity, reactive and violent and unorderly. As the expression of God, he was good. The expression of love, he was loving. Another word for divine love I like to think about, or God, is principle, the principle of the universe. And if he is a likeness of principle, he's an orderly man, a good man, an upright man. And I started to recognize that there just could not be two of him. There's all these moments in the Bible where there seems to be two things that you could choose from, and you need to put all of your weight on the right side. And often people misinterpret the Bible. We're going to talk about that today, how people often have misinterpreted Jesus' teachings. There's an idea in the Bible that there was two men in a field and only one would be taken. And some people think, maybe they're talking about physical people in the future, that some people will be brought up into heaven and other people won't. No, I think right there, as we'll see, everything, especially within the view of Jesus, he was seeing things in a spiritual light. And there often appears to be two of us, a mortal us, a limited us, and then there's a spiritual, God-made version of us. And that's the true us. It's like when we're seeing incompleteness in ourself or others, it's like wearing a goggle that is distorting things. Like I put on some scuba goggles once of someone who had a strong prescription, and the world was out there, but everything seemed distorted and wacky, right? And often through our materialistic beliefs and visions of the world, we look out on other people and we see such a distorted view of them. Well, I started to really stick in my prayer that day that man on that street who seemed so violent, seemed homeless, seemed to be no good in so many ways, that he was the image and likeness of God. That was the only identity that he had. And when that really clicked in my thought, all the fear just drained away. That fear that I was holding, that he could be violent, that he was in a way, expressing the opposite of God, and therefore he was the opposite of God. All that just drained away, and I said, oh no, the only identity he could have is as the expression of God, because God is the only source in all of creation. There's only one cause, it's love, and that this individual is God's beloved child. And those kind of simple ideas just came alive in my heart. And I could just feel the sense of healing and joy and upliftment. And the most wonderful thing happened when I saw him that next day for the first time. He was open to the ideas that I was sharing with him. He had a lucid mind, a clear mind. Whatever kind of neurotic mental disease he seemed to previously have, it just wasn't there anymore. He was just clear-minded. And the Bible talks about, God giving us a sound mind. And it was just a beautiful, holy moment, really, speaking to him that day. And from that moment on, he didn't like to hang out a couple blocks away from my apartment, but he liked to hang out right outside my front door on the stoop. And I found that sometimes when you love your neighbor as yourself, you find yourself acquiring a new neighbor. And it was so cool because the story really came full circle when, maybe it was a week or two after that, that I could overhear him speaking to some people outside my window often that walked by on the streets. And there was a homeless man who walked by who knew him. And he started to kind of unpack all of his woes to this man that I had previously prayed for. And then that man turned to the man who was sorrowful and seemed to be sick as well. And he said, "Can I pray for you?" And he started to share these beautiful ideas that were so akin to the ones that I had shared with him. But they were in his own words and in his own kind of unique way of talking. And shortly after that, I think that man went on. I didn't see him on the streets after that. Hopefully he got a job and is moving forward. But I loved that little experience that I had because it showed me the healing efficacy of understanding some of the basic ideas that are in the Bible, what it really understands, what it means to have and believe and know that there's one God and that each and every one of us are the image and likeness of God, the expressions of God. We're going to talk in this lecture how we can go deeper with some of these ideas. This book that I mentioned previously, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, it's a book that helps you understand the spiritual meaning of the Bible. It's what's considered the textbook of Christian science. And to say that there is a Christian science is to say that what gave Jesus the power to bring healing and harmony to people's lives through the power of divine love, it was not a mystery. It wasn't something relegated to a certain century, 2,000 years ago. It wasn't a gift that some people have and not others. It's a science. In other words, there's a universal logic to how to love in a way that brings out healing and harmony. And what this book essentially says is that even though we seem to see things changing in our human lives from good to bad, from well to sick, and so forth, from good to bad, well to sick, that these changes are not changes between two real and solid states, but that good is real, health is real, and it's actually ever present. And when we experience unhealth or something that is bad, it's wrong in the way that there's actually no God or principle behind it. So for example, with mathematics, you have a perfect principle in mathematics and these perfect laws that flow forth from that principle, mathematical equations. And if you take an equation like 8 plus 8 equals 16, it's perfect. It's true for everybody. It's a scientific fact. It exists in all time periods. It's not a mystery. Anyone can understand it. And the thing about it is you could see 8 plus 8 equals 16, and right next to it, 8 plus 8 equals, 22 or something, a wrong equation. And one of those equations, just because you see it, doesn't make it right, and the other one, the same, is true. It's wrong, but they could be written in the same font, the same size font. You could see them exactly the way you see them, but one is true and it's right because it has a principle behind it, and the other one is wrong, even though you can see it with your material senses. So often in life we see things like sickness and demented mentalities and so forth, and of course we think they're real. And people say, "What do you mean they're not real?" Of course, I see them, I experience them. But Christian Science shows that there's no really principle behind it. Harmony has a principle. Inharmony does not. Health has a principle behind it, a way to understand it, a way to build from it and experience it more. But sickness does not. And often when we think of healthcare these days, it's really about sickness prevention. You don't go to a doctor and they don't tell you, well, this is what health is and how to build upon health and health and health. And you can just have more health. No, they're usually trying to just prevent sickness. Well, Christian Science, it helps reveal not only the science of love, you could say, but the science of true health. And what it talks about is that health is the consciousness of harmony and of nothing else. In fact, Mary Baker Eddy in one of her books says that health is the consciousness of the unreality of pain and disease, or rather the absolute consciousness of harmony and of nothing else. And I love that. I think all of us would want to be conscious of harmony, conscious of health, conscious of love, if we knew how to get there. But many of us feel that health and harmony and goodness come from physical things, that they're physical. In other words, if you think health is physical, you might think it's in one place and not another. Like if there's a pill to make you healthy, well, I need to get in that place where that pill is, or I won't be healthy. Or if you think you can only feel love when you're around a certain person, well, then you need to get into that place to feel love. But the Bible teaches that the kingdom of heaven is within us. It's not place. We don't arrive some physical place and then we automatically feel health and harmony and joy and health, goodness, whatever. You have to discover it within you. And just like mathematics, mathematical truths, once you understand them, they're with you, they're within you, and then you can express them. You know, people who have a great sense of design, if you ever study like interior design, there are rules and laws associated with good design. And once you understand those, you can walk into any room and make it beautiful, but it's something that's within you and then it comes out. In Christian Science, it's really an inside-out kind of healing. And what it helps you do is detect the kind of thoughts that get in the way of you experiencing harmony in life. And really the main thought, I think, that helps, that the main problem is a sense of separation from God. Now, the way that Jesus helped people feel at one with God and bring healing into people's lives was through the process of prayer. And I love this symbol for prayer that we have all around the world. If you ask a child in Mozambique or in Afghanistan or in Calcutta or New York or Tampa, wherever you are, ask a child to draw what it looks like to pray, they'll most likely draw someone whose eyes are closed, their hands are folded, and they're probably down on their knees. Now, there are some variations to this symbol, but it is so incredibly ubiquitous. And I think it is for a good reason, because even though prayer is not a physical thing at all, we can and should pray all the time. The Bible says we should pray without ceasing. That symbol for prayer does connote what it really means to pray and to experience harmony through a mental method. Now, what is it to be down on our knees? What does that represent? I would say that that's about humility. You know, Jesus, once his disciples came up to him and said, how can we experience eternal life? What is eternal life, essentially? And he said, because they referred to him as good master, he said, why call me good? There's only one good, that is God. And immediately he took the question off of himself personally and he brought it back to the one cause. Before he could even talk about eternal life, a life that's fundamental, that's always here, it's always present, he had to address that idea that he could be something that contained goodness and that goodness wasn't somewhere else. But God is good, and therefore everything that God makes is good, not just Jesus. Well, that idea of getting down on our knees, that sense of humility is so central to prayer. You know, what did Jesus say? I can of my own self do some things. I'm a good, speaker and healer and teacher. But when it gets really tough, then I go to God. No. He said, I can of my own self do nothing. Nothing. He really had a sense that there wasn't anything that he could do to bring harmony that was separate from God, because God is the source of all life, all thought, all goodness. And prayer is really a state of listening. It's not coming before life with our own preconceptions of what is true or what must need to happen. We're open to God for an answer that will bless everyone, including ourselves. And what blesses one blesses all. Now we have that sense of humility, so important to really recognize there really is one cause creating and governing life. And I should say parenthetically that when I use that word God, I'm not thinking of a one God among many. Some atheists say, how can you believe in God? There's so many gods. How could yours be the right one? God is just the idea that there is something that's creating and governing life, a singular thing. And if you think about it, we often go through life thinking we are a little life. I have a life, you have a life, there's a little life over there, a little life. And then we think, I have a mind, you have a mind, they have a mind, little mind over there. But if we really think about it, we're all a part of one life, aren't we? It really is true. We're all a part of one life. And this life is creating and sustaining this moment right now. And I think what life is, it's the principle of existence. It's also a universal mind. If you ever have a dream at night, and in the dream there's all sorts of people, and there's a scenario, there's a whole world in the dream that you're walking in, there's all these senses that we normally have. And then you wake up from the dream and you think, oh, that whole thing that I thought was material actually was just a manifestation of mind. In that example, it was a limited, mortal mind, right? But you realize the whole thing was created by one mind. And I think that's what's going on right now. To the sense that we experience and are conscious of discord, that's our own misperceptions. But what's creating and governing life is the one infinite mind that is God, that is divine love. And so I think of God in a very universal way. It's not a denominational thing. What Christian Science reveals as God is just life, truth, and love, the principle of existence. And there's some other words that it uses for God too. It says that God is incorporeal, divine, supreme, infinite mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love. And these 7 words really considered to be synonyms in Christian Science, that you could take any of these words and use it fundamentally as God. These are different words that explain this concept of God from different angles. So God is life, but this life is love. This love is the principle of all life. Principle comes from the same word in its etymology as the word prime, meaning that it can't be reduced, it can't be explained in terms of anything else. And what can't be explained in terms of anything else is soul, the source of all beauty and creativity and goodness. Spirit is another word for God, similar to the word breath in its etymology, meaning something that we can see, move, and influence, but it's unseen to the physical senses itself. Because God is cause, and we are the effect. Every cause needs an effect. So God needs its image and likeness. It needs its image. It needs its effect. Well, if we go back to that prayer analogy, we've got someone down on their knees. We also have someone with their eyes closed. What does that represent, someone with their eyes closed? Jesus said we should go to pray in a closet. And he was man of the wilderness. There weren't a lot of closets around. And what I think he was saying there is that we need to block out our material, our physical perception of life. And why is that so? Because our material, our physical perception of life not only shows us limitation, but it often shows us the exact inverse of what is true. So, a classic example, you go out to the horizon line on the beach, and you see the earth in a way that it appears to be flat. And it turns out that our myopic, limited point of view is not just slightly wrong. It's not like, oh, well, actually, the earth is a little bit curved, actually, when you look at it from a higher point of view. No, it's the exact opposite. It's not flat, it's a spheroid. And how do we know that? How do we get to that vantage point? It requires a higher point of view, or a more heavenly point of view. You need to leave Earth's atmosphere altogether. And what you learn in the Bible is that when Jesus prayed, he left the atmosphere of earth, you could say, altogether, the mental atmosphere of false beliefs, limited beliefs about life. He lifted himself up to a higher, more heavenly view where he saw things from a higher perspective, from God's perspective, and he beheld what was true. I think each and every one of us are whole. We're beautiful. We're complete ideas of God. So often in life, we see each other from different state and stages of being. Young person, old person, well person, a sick person. And these are all kind of myopic, limited views of each other. I like the analogy, to use another analogy with the sun and the earth here. We talk about a sun rising, and a sun matures, you could say. It comes up to high noon, and then it eventually decays or starts to set, and then it goes away. And we talk about a sun rising and a sun setting as if they're things that are really happening, because that's what we see with our eyes, right? But they're not happening, are they? If we got a higher point of view, lifted ourselves up out of the Earth's atmosphere altogether in a spaceship, for example, got high enough, we would see that the sun is just shining all the time. It's not actually, going from darkness to just like it's kind of being born, just a little bit of light right in the break of day, and then getting higher and higher and maturing to its full capacity, and then getting dimmer and dimmer and smaller, and then dying. No, it doesn't do that. And it seems like we go through those cycles in life, of course. We're born, we rise to maturity. Most of us live a long life, and one day people don't see us anymore. But I think from God's point of view, we are beautiful ideas of God. And life is continuous. If you talk to somebody who has had a near-death experience or died and come back to life in one way or another, they'll usually have a story for you. They'll talk about life continuing. But what Jesus was teaching was not just life continuing when he talked about life eternal. I think he was talking about life being fundamental, that God is life. So in God there is no death at all. Talks about that in the book of Luke in the Bible. And I think Jesus saw that things like sin and disease and death, they appear to oppose us in our everyday lives, of course, and to limit us. But these weren't opposites of God or life or love or truth. These were experiences in life that really come from a sense of separation from God. And that comes to that last point of that prayer example, or the last image, you could say, of it, is that someone has hands coming together. So often in life, there appears to be this separation. God over here and a little us over here. Or all of life really appears as a kind of duality, male, female, Republican, Democrat, up, down, black, white, whatever it is, these opposites. And but in prayer, there's a coming together. There's unification. There's just oneness. There's not two. And I mentioned the beginning of the Bible a little bit before. The beginning of the Bible is interesting because the very first chapter, it's this gorgeous poem about the true essence of creation. And it essentially says that God makes everything that was made. And behold, it was very good. And there's the continuity of goodness, like progress is the law of God. But there's no exception to goodness, to God. There's no introduction of the devil or of evil or of something bad or some opposition or secondary power to God. No, it just says God made all that was made. Behold, it was very good. And that's the end of the chapter. More than 50 ands in that book, not a single but, not a single exception to this goodness. And then the chapter closes. So, life doesn't seem like that, does it? But there is a Genesis 2. And in this second chapter of Genesis, it presents this idea of duality, the way we often think of life. But it starts from a false sense of our origin. And what it starts with is a sense of God, or the creative power of the universe, as a capricious, dualistic God that's both good and bad. And that it makes man, in its image and likeness, as a dualistic good and bad creature. And it makes man not just spiritual, because if God is spirit, then man could only be spiritual. We could only be spiritual. But no, it makes man out of both the dust of the ground, what today we might call matter, and then also of spirit or mind, right? There's a mixture. And that's how often we think of ourselves as, we're both physical, we have physical body, but we have some mental or spiritual elements too. We're kind of a dualistic creature, both good and bad. Well, what happens to this dualistic creature in the second chapter of Genesis? Right away it falls asleep. It starts to dream that woman was created to serve him, to serve Adam, this first man. He must have been dreaming. And he starts to dream essentially that his children, because I think this whole second chapter of Genesis, it is a continuation of a dream, of a false sense of life. Starts to dream that his children are forever at war with each other because they believe that life is limited, it's material, and they need to fight for it. And that violence is just an inherent part, a natural part of this kind of dualistic nature that we are. Well, the Bible, through the life of Christ Jesus, shows us how we can get out of this trap of dualism. And instead of seeing life as a cycle between, birth and death and good and bad, it shows that life is entirely good, entirely made of love. And like mathematics, if you're starting to learn mathematics right away, you might see a lot of chaos around you. Say if you're trying to build a house without knowing much mathematics. Well, the houses would fall down and the boards wouldn't stay together. But the more you would learn about mathematics and how to apply them to building, the more you would build structurally sound buildings. But they would have to be built on principles that are perfect, the perfect rules of mathematics. Well, if you haven't read your Bible in a while, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, wonderful place to start. This is called the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus, he talks about really the true consciousness we can gain by expressing the qualities of God. And this Sermon on the Mount, about 10 pages, the founder and discoverer of Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, she was someone who essentially said that if you read this Sermon on the Mount and put it into practice in your lives every week, that's enough for Christian practice. And that's saying a lot for this woman who really spent every minute of her day striving to be conscious of God and show others how to be conscious of God in a way that brings healing. Well, I like to call those 10 pages Jesus' greatest hits because they show so many salient points of how to bring out healing in our lives. It begins with this list of qualities, essentially. Jesus said we're blessed or happy or blissful, content, when, and then he talks about all these qualities of thought, meekness, humility, striving to do what's right, righteousness, being a peacemaker. These are all our natural states of mind because they flow from God. And then in there, Jesus says, be perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect. This idea of identity, it's so crucial to the way that Jesus saw life. We need to be like God, and God is perfect. Well, one of the analogies that Jesus brings out in the Bible to bring this to life is this analogy with light. I mentioned that Jesus called himself the light of the world, but he didn't relegate it to just himself. He called others following in his path, the light of the world as well. And if you imagine a light beam, you saw a light beam come out from some trees, for example, and you walked up to that light beam and you said, "You're no good." Wouldn't change the light beam from shining. I mean, if you walk up to the light beam, you try to whack that light beam, wouldn't change it. Try to abuse it, manipulate it, wouldn't stop it from shining. Just a moment later, would be completely unaffected. Completely unaffected. A second later, right? Completely unaffected. You walk up to that light beam, you try to put it into a box, bring it into another room, open up that box. Will the light beam be in there? No. Why is that so? Because if we're honest with ourselves, do we identify ourselves and others on a regular basis as the image and likeness of God, as the light of the world, as the Son of God? No, I don't think so. I think many of us don't do that moment to moment, but it is true. If it's true, we're just awakening to the truth right here and now. We're taking off our distorted glasses of reality. In other words, we're taking out off our materialistic perceptions and fears about life, a dualistic vision of life. And, Jesus, I think it really was his ability to see through what you could call a spiritual sense of life that allowed him to bring healing. Now, that spiritual sense of life, it was not based upon what someone had said. It wasn't based upon what had physically occurred in their life or in their body previously, or what seems to be occurring right now. It wasn't based upon how the world had tried to box people in as male or female, or this age, or from this part of town, or with these proclivities, right? Or these genetics in today's words. In his day, it would be like who your father was or who your mother was. And, Jesus saw each and every one of us as valuable. I love the analogy that you take any number in the number system, take 1,632,000. Doesn't seem like a very important number, kind of lonely number. You've probably never seen it in your life, never wrote it down. But if you plucked that number out of reality, I guarantee you this live stream would stop working. I guarantee you banking systems all around the world would just crash. The stock market would crash, worse than any pandemic or inflation crisis could cause. And just because that one little number went missing. Well, each and every one of us, I think we're so much more valuable to God, to life, than any number. We're the intelligent, loving expression of God. And, some years ago, I was praying about how to, get outside of myself and really see the light of God in everyone. And, not just think about my own life. So often in life, it's easy to get caught up in, what are we going to do today? And how can I better my own experience? How can I make more money? How can I, find more success in my career? How can I find the thing on Amazon that I want to buy right now? It's just like me, little hamster wheel. Well, Jesus, he wasn't on that hamster wheel. When he talked about why he was here on earth, what his mission statement was, he said he came to seek and save the lost. He said he came to testify to the truth. And he said he came to bring life and life more abundantly. And again, that sense of dualism, we often think of life and death. You might think, well, Jesus came to bring life and to bring death. No. There's just life and life more abundantly. God and God more abundantly. God and the progress that is the law of God. And, Jesus, I think the way he saw love was in a scientific way. I think he was the most scientific man who ever trod the globe. That's a line in this book, Science and Health, and I think it's right. And I think he was scientific in the way that he knew what was true. Science comes from the word knowledge. And when Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free, he was talking about a kind of universal knowledge about life that's the most important knowledge in the world. It's the knowledge of what is creating and sustaining the existence of God, and what are we as the expressions of God. And that knowledge brought health and healing into people's lives in a way that was more wonderful and true than I think was ever brought into experience by anyone else or by any other method. And the thing is that some years ago when I was praying about how I could be more unselfed, I started to think about the nature of love. Now, if someone came up to you on the street and said, I am love itself, but I'm not going to show you, that wouldn't be very loving, would it? The nature of love is to reveal itself, to show itself. And there is no love without it being felt and experienced. And so I wanted to go to where I considered something to be dark and without love. Because I think the reason why Jesus was the most scientific man who ever trod the globe is that he understood that the basis of life, that is love, is everywhere. And right where there seemed to be opposition to that, right where his own religion was saying, okay, oh, yeah, love is true, but we're the ones who got it, right? The Jews are the ones who have the truth. And they were looking down upon people like the Samaritans. Jesus gave a parable of the Good Samaritan, and of how this Samaritan could express love, better than the highest standing Jews. And why was he doing that? Because he was showing that it's not what a label we have on the surface, or not even what we profess to believe. It's what we actually do through the power of love. That's what science is about. It's about testing something out and showing results. It's not just saying, I believe this is going to happen, and something's going to happen to me when I die later on. It's not like that. That's not science. But Jesus, he was testing out the power of love in every situation that seemed to be hateful or seemed to be absent from love, because he knew that we're at one with divine love, with God, and that God is in all spaces. I love this idea that God is the principle of existence, because a principle, it doesn't make something and then, and it's not connected with it anymore, right? You could see that like 2 + 2 = 4 comes from the principle of mathematics and contains that logic, and that principle is always there to enforce and uphold any equation. It's always at one with it. There is no principle of mathematics without its perfect equations. Now, I was praying about this sense of love, and I certainly took a cue from Jesus' example, because he not only showed love where his religion wasn't loving, but right where his own culture was saying, yeah, it's good to love, but don't love the tax collector. They're ripping us off. They're expressing the worst qualities, just the opposite of God. Well, what did Jesus do? He spoke to tax collectors. He spoke to prostitutes, where people thought he would lose his reputation if he spoke to them. And he also, right where the medical field of the day was saying, don't go touch those lepers. God must hate them. They've got a problem. That's real contagion over there. Jesus went to those lepers, touched them, and some of them were healed, and he didn't contract that disease, because his higher understanding of health superseded that false and limited, fearful belief. And so Jesus really saw that love was everywhere. And it's a wonderful thing to pray about. How can I, as the expression of God, be a light of the world right now? Where can I go to light up a dark place? I love this analogy about light and darkness. Like, we think of darkness as the opposite of light, but if you had a dark place, maybe as a box that had been forever concealed, it was built concealed, a light had never entered this box, and you might say that inside this box is true darkness. There has never been anything but darkness inside of this box. Well, then you take just the tiniest flashlight in the world, and you just, open up that box a little bit and shine that flashlight in. And to that flashlight's perspective, that flashlight would say, I don't see any darkness. I only see what my light illumines here, right? Imagine if there's something beautiful in that box to discover, right? That flashlight would say, oh, look at this beautiful thing that I see. It's not darkness here at all. Well, I think Jesus, he was seeing through the light of love, through God's eyes. And he was saying essentially, like, I don't see this darkness that you guys are talking about. And he said, I am not of this world. I think he meant he wasn't taking on board limited material theories of life. He was getting his perception of life right from God. And we can too. We can too. So I want to share another example here of healing that should bring some of these ideas to life. Some years ago, I went to a prison. This was outside of where I was living at the time in Boston. And, this prison, it was just a really dark place. It had maximum security there, and I had never been in a place like that before. I was inspired by some friends I had who had gone there and shared with inmates and really saw so much goodness in these men, even in this very dark place, and even though they had done terrible things. And I remember being there one time, and I was talking to somebody, and I told this man, you could tell me every bad thing you did in the world, and it wouldn't impress me one bit. But if you tell me one good thing that you did, one good quality that you have, I'm going to be all ears. Because to me, that's right. There's a principle behind it. It's true about you. But every bad thing that you talk about, that's just like, a bad equation in math. And are you supposed to memorize a bad equation? 2 + 2 = 5. Does any teacher, school teacher say, memorize that, remember that, that's going to be helpful to you? No. You don't. We have a tendency to make the bad things in life really stick and to remember those. But there's no substance behind them. We might want to think of them as a lesson, what not to do, maybe that, but that only, right? And so the second time I went to this jail, I had really been praying, and I moved all my appointments for that day. The one thing I was going to do was going to go to this jail and share it with these individuals. I was so excited, and I thought, I'm going to make a big difference. And I expected a big crowd, and then only a few people showed up. It's only 2 people, in fact. And I was quite disappointed. I know a lot of churches right now, they've been telling me they're having a hard time with membership and so forth. And not everybody's coming back to in-person church services after the pandemic, or, it seems like our society is moving away from religion and that sort of thing. Well, I hope this story helps with that too, if that's something you're struggling with. I wasn't impressed with the numbers right away. I was at first, but then I thought to myself, Christianity has always been about the few and the faithful. And Jesus was getting big crowds. It was at that point where he said, if you want to follow me, you need to drink my blood and eat my body. And people said, this teaching is too hard, and it says that large crowds left. Well, Jesus, of course, wasn't seeing things physically. And when people interpreted his words physically or materially, he clearly wasn't talking about cannibalism there, they often left when they were just in a very materialistic or physically minded state of thought. But Jesus saw things in a holy spiritual way. And those who were interested in that and ready for that, they followed him. But he wasn't impressed with the big crowds. And sometimes he said things that made those big crowds leave. And then at the end of Jesus' life, everyone abandoned him. His followers, right? Even his dearest disciples who said, I will not leave you, like Simon Peter. Even him denied that he even knew Jesus at his darkest moment. So at the end of Jesus' life, you could say that he was the one standing Christian. Christian, by the way, wasn't even a word they used then. Jesus said he was teaching the way, right? It was so universal, I think, the way he thought about it. And yet, even though Jesus was only the last Christian on earth, you could say, the last practitioner of true universal love in that moment, he didn't give up on people. In fact, you could ask yourself, who was Jesus resurrecting to in the Bible? And you could say it was a bunch of people who had all just denied him at his darkest hour. And it was that moment when Jesus really proved for himself what you could say that death doesn't have the last word, and that life and life more abundantly is the forever truth. He overcame what the Bible calls the last enemy. That's what really changed everything. The fishermen, his disciples went back to fishing, went back to their old jobs after that. Before that happened, but after the resurrection, then they started to go out and see life as Jesus saw it, and with so much confidence, they started to heal themselves, started to naturally bring harmony into people's lives, saw the signs and wonders of God following them as they did it. And as I was talking to these 2 young men in the prison there, I started to share with them what's called the Christian Science Bible lesson. Every week, someone reads from the Bible and also from this book, Science and Health. You read the same Christian Science Bible lesson in churches all around the world. In fact, before this little lecture started, I was speaking to one of the sponsors of this event, the sponsor, Burien, Washington, and one of the dear members was preparing to read that lesson tomorrow at their church. And I was reading that lesson to these folks, and you could tell that they were taking a lot of the ideas seriously. They were really listening. You could hear a pin drop in that little room. And yet they weren't buying it, and they started to hold up their hands, especially the younger of the two. And he said, "Hey, Nate, I don't think you know who I am." He said, "I am a bad person." And this is a big guy with all these tattoos and everything. And it's not just me. My father, bad person, criminal. Grandfather, bad person, criminal. I think it's just in my blood. And I thought to myself, well, I've got a story about blood for you. And I had once been diagnosed with a chronic blood issue. It was a hemoglobin deficiency. And I was really into mountaineering at the time and kept getting sick at high altitudes. And before I took a month-long mountaineering course, I was given a diagnosis of a hemoglobin deficiency. And I was told that I couldn't take that class. Well, I prayed with that light beam analogy. And I started to think about myself as not defined by what someone had said about me, not defined by what had physically occurred in my past, not defined by how anybody was trying to box me in, including myself, by any materialistic definition. And I started to think about myself in a purely spiritual way. At the end of the Bible, there's this book of Revelation, and it essentially says all of our visions of sorrow and death, sickness pass away, and then it says, "Behold, I, God, make all things new." And I was just like a light beam. It's brand new every moment. You know, put your hand up to it for as long as you want, take it down, brand new. And that light beam only has one source, the sun. And that sun, it creates that light beam as its very own being in a way that's brand new every moment. And I started to think, oh, I'm actually not defined by material words, instances, by material definitions of myself. I'm defined by God. And if God is love, I am loving. God is spirit, I am spiritual. You know, God is principled, and that everything is working right within me. There's a perfection within me. And I start to feel that beautiful idea in Romans 8:28, that all things work together for good to them that love God. And I felt this right working within me. And I knew that that was scientifically true. In other words, it was something that not only could be tested and experienced, but it was something based upon universal truth, that truth that's truer than true that's in the Bible. Well, I ended up going back to the doctor and was allowed into that course, and there was a shift that happened within me that allowed me to ethically move forward, and in fact that there was a real healing that took place, and I never had similar kinds of problems hiking at high altitudes, and I've been fine with that ever since. And I started to share that with my friend there in the prison, but more importantly, I shared with him that light beam analogy and how it was true for him. I said, if you're hateful, you're going to feel wrong because it's literally wrong. You are the image and likeness of love. If you love, it's going to feel good, it's going to feel right because it's literally right. I was sharing ideas like this, you know. If God is spirit, you're spiritual here and now. You know, reading the Bible might make you understand more about your spiritual nature. You know, reading this book, Science and Health, certainly jumpstart your biblical studies, help you understand more about the science, the logic behind those healings and wonderful parables and so forth in the Bible. But you are spiritual. This is just true. It's not something you become through a process of transmutation or something. It's just who you are right here and now. You become aware of it when we take off these materialistic goggles, you could say, these distorted visions of life built up of material concepts. But it's just always true that you're whole, you're one, you're an idea of God. You're at one with God, forever at one with God. And as I was sharing ideas like this with this man, you could see the wheels turning, because he really had defined himself by his father. And the Bible says, call no man on earth your father. It wasn't just it's not just anti-family. This is something Jesus said. I think what Jesus was teaching there was that we're not the image and likeness of a person. That's not the right way to think about ourselves. We're the image and likeness of God. And sometimes when we think of image and likeness of a person, we might think just like our father, like what the man was dealing with. But we might also just think, well, we've seen what's possible for other humans, and that's what's possible for us. But Jesus didn't base his life on what other humans had done before him. He didn't see himself as a human being fundamentally. He saw himself as a spiritual expression of God. And that unlocked hidden potential that the world had never seen. And so that man, he ended up taking the Bible back to his cell that day. He took a Science and Health. He started ardently reading these books, started getting his nose in them. Now fast forward about 6-7 weeks later, he comes back to this jail. This time I'm there again reading the Christian Science Bible lesson, and there's a big crowd. The congregation had multiplied. And he had his arms kind of around these buddies of his, as if to say, this is my crew here. They're ready for this too. And the service, this informal service, got going quickly. And I didn't get to talk to that man right away, but I certainly wanted to, because he seemed like a transformed man. And at the end of that little service, he just sauntered up to me nice and slow, and he said, "Hey, Nate, I got a testimony for you." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, when I came into this jail, I had been diagnosed with lung cancer." And he said, boy, I was struggling, and I didn't want to get this invasive surgery, and I heard over the intercom you were going to give a healing service. That's why I came that day. He said, after I heard those different ideas and I started to read those books, all the symptoms disappeared. My buddies were figuring it was a relapse. They said, I'll be back next week. Waited a week, another week, another week. He eventually canceled his appointment for surgery. And there he was, standing in front of me as this beautiful paragon of health. And he was just shining all those qualities that are highlighted in the Sermon on the Mount. Humility, meekness, striving to know truth and be a peacemaker. He was just so alive with those qualities. It was so clear he was the child of God. He was the light of the world. He was the image and likeness of divine love. And he got quiet at that moment, and he said, "Now, do you think this could help me in other areas of my life?" And of course I said yes. The beautiful thing about Christian Science healing is that it's not just patching up one area of our life. So often we bifurcate our life into kind of physical and mental components, and then further bifurcate it into these branches of, there's you talk to a priest or pastor for spiritual help, and then a psychologist for kind of everyday relationship issues, and then you talk to a doctor for pills, but then maybe a sports nutritionist for your exercise, and you got all these different people you're going to, and sometimes we can see individuals in our life as an expression of God, as an expression of love, but not the source of it. And Christian Science really shows us the source of health and of goodness, and it's the infinite mind. It's God. And when we start to understand the nature of true thought that flows from God and hold steadfastly to that, then we can see this enduring good in our lives begin to blossom and blossom and blossom. Life and life more abundantly. Health and more healthy interactions and experiences. It's so good. It's so good to really start with God. This book, it says, to begin rightly is to end rightly. And it also talks about man's false sense of origin, as the cause of discord. And we really need to understand our origin, God, to feel original, to feel good, to feel ourselves, right? And, the author of Science and Health, Mary Baker Eddy, was an extraordinary woman who really spent so much of her life just seeking out the principle of mind healing, of healing through spiritual means, healing through a consciousness of God. From a very early age, she sensed this as a possibility. In fact, she had experienced it. She would pray for family members, pray for animals on her farm when she was just a little one. And often she would see healing, and it kind of, freaked out. Even her dad, who was a devout Christian, but he just didn't see that kind of healing as natural. It seemed strange, it seemed supernatural. But it wasn't supernatural, it was supernatural. Most natural thing in the world. It just came from the universal consciousness of divine love, our natural consciousness. And yet, so many times she prayed for herself, and it didn't work. And she was sick for the first half of her life, for a huge chunk of it. At age 44, she had kind of a transformational moment, reading some of Jesus' healings where some ideas really clicked. And from that point on, she started to view people as the image and likeness of God in a new and more concrete way. And she started quickly healing people. There's a lot of books written about her, biographies. This one, Christian Healer, I really love. Catalogs were 300 healing experiences from her life. Really incredible stuff. It was purported that she healed cancer in many forms, often given up by the medical field. It was a medical doctor who said, you got to write a book about this. And when she wrote Science and Health, it wasn't just kind of a quick, like, oh yeah, here's basically what I've done and what I've seen. Boy, she labored to write this book. She wrote it over a 35-year period, revised it over 400 times, really wanted to get everything right in this book. And it wasn't just like she had a revelation from God and wrote it down. She had these incredibly inspired moments where she really felt deeply at one with God and felt like she was writing what was universally true for everybody. But then she would go back, she would test it like any scientist would. She would try to put those ideas into practice, and she would learn more and more how to more gracefully, more lovingly, more wonderfully, sublimely articulate these ideas so that they would really touch everyone's heart. And the first chapter in this book, it's all about prayer. It's a wonderful chapter, and it flows into a next chapter that's all about Jesus and how to understand Jesus' life. And there's so much in this book that shows us practically how to be true Christians, really trying to gain the kingdom of heaven, the consciousness of divine infinite love right here and now, and transform the world just as Jesus did when he was here. Now, Mary Baker Eddy, she was someone who really understood that a personal healer should not be worshipped or cherished as the source of good or healing. Just like Jesus, when someone asked him about eternal life and said, Master, and he turned them right back to God, there's only one good God. Mary Baker Eddy was constantly doing that kind of thing. And so often religion or spirituality goes off the rails when there's someone who has had some inspired moment or maybe some healing incident, but then people start to worship them as the source of healing or revelation or something like that, and that you need to go to them physically to experience good in your life. That sort of thing can be very corrosive. But Mary Baker Eddy, I think she really understood the value that she was bringing to the world through her discovery of Christian Science. And she referred to herself not as spiritual healer Mary Baker Eddy in her books, but constantly as the discoverer of Christian Science and the founder of the Christian Science movement. I like to think about it just in terms of music. Like if you saw the best musician in the world, and if you didn't know anything about the science of music, you might think, oh, that's mystery, that's magic, that's a gift they have. And you might be so taken with that music that you just want to be around that musician all the time. And, there are some great musicians we love to go and see, and we love to hear their good work. But what's so cool is that there's a science of music. So any of us can learn how to play music. Actually, I once took a kind of music that is an African drumming music. And I always had the intuition that, drumming, like rhythm, that's really something that is kind of a gift. Like some people are rhythmic and other people aren't. And I thought, well, melody, anybody can kind of learn melody, but rhythm, that is something more that some people have, others don't. And I had a teacher who just taught this kind of very advanced rhythmic African polyrhythmic music in a way that it was just like a language. Anyone can learn a language. And she would teach it. And then people were just breaking out of their misconceptions that they weren't musical left and right. And all of a sudden they were doing these amazing rhythms. And it did seem like a miracle to me at first. It was the most natural thing in the world. And I think what Mary Baker Eddy did through her writings for everyday people is show that, spiritual healing is the most natural thing in the world. We all have this ability within us because it's actually just seeing life in the right way. Harmony is always present, and we have the natural ability. It's right, it's good to see, to hold to good thoughts, and to see and experience harmony. Now, just quickly, just someone who met Mary Baker Eddy, her name was Harriet O'Brien. She was someone who had just about every ill you could imagine, chronic spine issues, chronic heart issues. She picked up what's called an iatrogenic ailment, something caused by medical intervention. And she was at death's throes when a Christian Scientist taught by Mary Baker Eddy started to pray for her. Well, to the astonishment of many people, I'm sure, she quickly recovered with Christian Science treatment. She had been so ill, she stopped speaking. She said she had to relearn how to speak and write. And she did. She became a very successful woman, worked personally for Mary Baker Eddy. But right after her healing, I think she really wanted to meet Mary Baker Eddy, like get to the source, right? And when she met Mary Baker Eddy, this is what she said about her. She said about Mary Baker Eddy that transparency is the word that best expresses my impression of Mrs. Eddy. Instinctively, I felt her great love, and I was conscious that no one I had ever seen loved me as much as she did. My entire thought was filled with a spiritual illumination, and there was a glory in the sunshine and landscape as though a breath of heaven had swept earth and enveloped me. And you might think after experiencing that Harriet O'Brien might say, okay, I want to meet Mary Baker Eddy again tomorrow. I want to see her again. But that wasn't her feeling. In this book, A Christian Healer, this is one of the books that talks about this incident. She said that my trip to Boston was for the purpose of determining whether the time had come for me to open a practitioner's office. After seeing Mrs. Eddy, all my questions were fully answered, and I returned to Kansas City and opened my office, this is as a Christian Science practitioner, at once, healing desperate illnesses and sometimes raising the dying in 1 or 2 visits. How cool is that? And she ended up advertising in the Christian Science Journal for over 50 years and left a record of healing, helped many, many people. So I just love that example because this woman had, it seemed so many issues, seemed to be dying. Not only was she helped and healed through Christian Science treatment, but she learned that she could be a healer too, and went off and had a long and successful career in doing so. Well, it's going to be time for questions. If you have a question, again, you could email me at lectureqa@gmail.com. I'll take a few questions here. lectureqa@gmail.com, or if you're on YouTube, you can ask right on the chat feature there. That's a very easy way to do it. And after we get a few questions, I'll just wrap it up for everybody. Again, a big thanks to the sponsors of this event, the First Church of Christ Scientist in Burien, Washington, USA. I hope you get a chance to visit their church someday if you're ever in their area. You can check out more about their church, christianscienceburien.org. Okay, so I don't have any questions in quite yet, but there was one question someone was asking me recently, and it was just about this concept of heaven. Because even though they heard some explanations about Christian Science, they still felt from their biblical study that heaven really is a physical place that we go to when we die. So often people didn't understand what Jesus was saying in the Bible because they interpreted what he said in a physical manner. So when he said, you need to drink my blood and eat my body, people were thinking of it physically and saying, oh, I'm out of here, right? When he said that his friend Lazarus, who was clearly dead, was sleeping, people laughed him to scorn because they knew that this man was not just sleeping, that he was physically dead, but Jesus saw that he was spiritually sleeping and that he wanted to awake his mind. But he knew that Lazarus was not dead. He was just in a different experience, and he could help awake him right here and now. And these ideas, sometimes they can seem abstract to people. Spirituality can seem abstract. But if you think, what are the most meaningful moments of your life? Moments of love, intelligence, of goodness. And the thing is, if we think of heaven, or hell for that matter, as a place, then we'll start to realize, well, a place can't really make us feel heaven or hell. Like I've been to some of the places that have been considered heaven on earth, some amazing tropical places and mountainous regions as well. And I've been there, and when I've been in these incredibly idyllic places, if I haven't felt God inspired and loved and at right with life, with God, then I've often felt horrible. I remember feeling terribly heartbroken in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and it just felt like hell to me, right? All alone there. And conversely, I've been into some of the most dank, dark, gross places in the world, right? Some unsanitary hospitals, maximum security prisons. And in those physical places, when I've been really conscious of God, what Christian Science could call the science of being, the universal understanding of our true being, when I've been conscious of those facts, boy, it has been absolute heaven for me. Had some of the most wonderful, memorable moments of my life in physically very bad places. Now, if you take this even further, Jesus, he never said we go to heaven when we die. He said heaven is here. He said it's within us. And if you think of really gaining heaven within you, when I think of heaven, I think of the qualities of God. When you think of gaining intelligence and beauty and love within you. Take somebody who knows a lot about beauty, like an interior designer. You could bring them into a very physically bad place, but before you know it, that designer, because they have beauty within them, will start to bring out beautiful design. You take an incredibly loving person. You put them into a hateful situation. Before long, that situation will turn to love. You take somebody who is incredibly intelligent, put them into a scenario where unintelligent solutions are all around. Slowly and surely, I'm sure the intelligence, you'll start to see it in that scenario with that truly intelligent person at the helm. And so you can see that, even if you were in a heavenly or hellish place, if the qualities of God were within you, you would make it more heaven, or you would transform the hell to a heaven. Heaven has to be an internal space. And to take it even further here, just kind of keep going here, God is infinite mind. So God is, makes ideas, mental ideas. We are mental. Primarily, we're ideas of God. And so, things start in mind. Everything starts in mind. You can't start with a concept of matter and then get a good result or get a correct result. So you can't start with the concept that heaven is a physical place and get a true sense of heaven and an experience of it here and now. There's so many points here. Now is the only moment that God ever makes. Whenever we're thinking we're going to get good later, yes, the best is yet to come always, because progress is the law of God. But the wholeness and goodness of God is always present. And the only moment that God ever makes is the now. And right now, God's love is fully, fully present. And that's what heaven is. The experience of God's love fully, fully present. Okay, let's see if any other questions have come in. Somebody is asking about why do I think that the disciples gave up on Jesus? Wouldn't they be so convinced by all the healings that they had seen in the past? It's a good question. It's easy to say, well, if I was in the shoes of those disciples, I wouldn't have given up on Jesus. Well, of course, their lives are being threatened. And when our lives are threatened, everything goes out the door, right? Because their concept of life still was material, right? Even though they had a sense that these spiritual ideas that Jesus was sharing were good, and that they had seen some things which they didn't understand fully, some miracles. And those miracles were supernatural, most natural thing in the world, but they didn't fully understand it yet. And they still had the sense of their life being physical, and that death was the worst thing in the world, of course. And in every way, we want to live long and beautiful lives. The Bible talks about, God allowing us to live long and beautiful lives. But the fear that our lives somehow can be taken away by some offensive or material process starts to go away the more we understand about spirit, about God. Jesus, when he went before Pilate in the Bible, when Pilate seemed to think that he had the ability to take Jesus' life away, Jesus made it clear that he did not have that power. Because I think Jesus understood that God was life, and that he was the very expression of life, and that there was no power over him but the power of God. And through that understanding, he touched people's lives in a way that continued to prove that point. And so I do think sometimes it's easy in retrospect to think, well, I would have acted differently if I was in that scenario. If I was a disciple of Jesus, I wouldn't have forsaken him. Every generation, we often have limited and judgmental thoughts, which future generations will be able to see more clearly, and so, for example, in the past, people thought they were very good people, but at the same time they were racist, right? And now, of course, we see how wrong that is. And the school my daughter is going to just got renamed because there was someone who was a slaveholder, and they named it for someone whose life had a better record. And we want to continually get better, but when we look at people in the past, even we can learn from their faults, and we want to learn the lessons from them, and then take the best of that and move forward expressing God. Okay, let's see if any other questions came in. Someone's just asking, how do I see someone through the eyes of love when all they ever do is judge and criticize me? So you don't want to stay in a situation that is harmful to you in any way if it doesn't feel good for your growth. We want to love the hell out of everyone, just if someone seems to be expressing hellish qualities, we want to get that out of them, right, the best way we can. But at the same time, we're responsible for our thinking. And if someone isn't open to that, and they're not willing to be receptive to love, and sometimes we need to move on from that situation. We want to put ourselves in situations where we can be active healers, and we can feel like we're doing the most good. So every situation is unique. One of the things I love about Christian Science is that it doesn't make any strong claims that this is how you have to do it every time in this situation. Because as we pray, unique answers right from God are going to come right to us, whether we need to stay in a situation or not, or how to love somebody. But I'll just share a last thought here, and this will be to conclude the lecture, and it will help answer this question a bit. Everything we've been looking at today, it really flows from this singular concept that is the first line of Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. It says that the prayer that reforms the sinner and heals the sick is an absolute faith that all things are possible to God, a spiritual understanding of him, and unselfed love. Love this line so much. And, we've been exploring, whether you know it or not, this concept of absolute faith. If you walk out to on the beach and look at the horizon line, and it looks flat, even though because you see that so often that the world looks flat, my floor looks flat, right? It's like life, the earth, from our myopic little standpoint, so often appears flat. We don't say, well, okay, I know from the bigger picture life is a spheroid, but what about let's say it's 25% flat and 75% a spheroid. No, if you calculate that into your GPS, when you travel somewhere, you would not get in the right place. You have to calculate when you're using a GPS, for example, that the Earth is a sphere. It's a ball in space, right? You have to calculate from the correct higher standpoint. And the same is true when you're looking at life spiritually. You have to say, it's completely spiritual, not material at all. It's even though we see life as limited and material so much of the time, what we learn in Christian Science is how to begin in a humble and gentle and helpful way to see life as entirely spiritual. And that line, absolute faith, understanding, and love, if we have an absolute faith in someone, that means to be there for them, to no matter what, no matter how often they show bad qualities, just like Jesus did with his disciples. He came back to those people because he knew who they were. He had an absolute faith in them. But that absolute faith, it was based upon an understanding of God and of each one of us as the likeness of God. And it was also based upon universal love. Jesus didn't love as a bargain deal. I'll love you as long as I'm getting the love back. He loved because God first loves us, as the Bible says. God first loved us. And if we have an absolute faith in someone, really seek to understand them, which takes quality time, takes non-judgmental listening, takes really seeing the qualities of God in them and rejoicing in them. And then we love them without a sense of self, without trying to get something out of it. That's going to make for a beautiful relationship. Now, if someone's not accepting that absolute faith, understanding, and love, again, we don't need to be around someone if sometimes our journeys are not going hand in hand. We want to feel like we're in the right place. God always gives us our right place. And sometimes that's a very dark place. God leads us into prisons and difficult places in life that we need to hang on tight to and really see the light penetrate it until we see transformation. In fact, if this is a marriage situation, there's a whole chapter on marriage in this book that's really lovely, helps people along those lines. But to conclude here, that one line about absolute faith that includes understanding and love, as we do that with God, we really have an absolute faith in life and seek to understand what life is, and then express the life that is love. That's going to make for a truly healthy life, a truly healthy experience. Not only better relationships, a healthier functioning body, and a kind of health that I don't think can be achieved by any pill that's on earth now or ever will be created. I think the only real health can be discovered through real consciousness. I hope you took something from this lecture. Again, a big thanks to the sponsors from Burien, Washington, just wonderful people out there. You can check out their website, christianscienceburien.org, for a replay of this event. I hope you caught a glimpse of how to pray and heal and of what Christian Science is and what it can do for you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.